Have you ever felt like you are carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, struggling to do everything yourself, and wondering if you're ever going to make it? There's a powerful truth that can free you from this burden, a truth that reveals that your efforts are important, but there's something greater at work behind the scenes. If you ever find yourself overwhelmed by the challenges in your life, questioning whether you can keep going, what if I told you that you are not alone in this journey? What if there's a divine hand guiding you, and your part is simply to do your best? Stick with me till the end, and I promise you will see how surrendering your plans to God can unlock a life filled with peace, purpose, and provision. The world often tells us that we have to do everything ourselves. We are taught to take control, to fight, to push harder, to prove ourselves, and to make things happen by any means necessary. And while there's truth in the importance of hard work and dedication, there's also a deeper truth. No matter how much we strive, no matter how much we achieve on our own, we cannot accomplish everything by our own strength. The real key to success, to fulfillment, and to peace in this life is understanding that there's a divine partner, a force beyond our understanding, who is willing to work with us if we simply choose to do our part and trust Him with the rest. As Christians, we are called not only to give our best, but also to surrender the outcome to God. In the Bible, we see numerous stories of individuals who did their part with all their heart, and in turn, God stepped in and made the impossible happen. He took their efforts, multiplied them, and brought about results far greater than they could have ever achieved on their own. When we understand this, we realize that our best is enough, but only when we let God do the rest. This is the essence of faith, believing in His power, trusting in His timing, and resting in His perfect will. When we look at the lives of the great figures in the Bible, Moses, David, Daniel, Esther, and many others, we see a pattern. They didn't just sit back and hope for divine intervention. They took action. They did their best. But when it came to the impossible, they relied on God's strength, wisdom, and timing to bring them through. They understood that while they were not in control of every outcome, God was, and He was the one who would bring them to the place they needed to be. It's so easy to be caught up in the idea that we must do everything on our own, that we must make every decision, push through every difficulty, and fight every battle by ourselves. But the truth is, there is only so much we can control. We can control our actions, our attitude, and our obedience, but we cannot control the world, the people around us, or even the future. That's why it's so crucial to understand the power of partnership with God. When we do our best, He will do the rest. I want to tell you today that it's okay to surrender. It's okay to know that you are not carrying this burden alone. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to fix everything. God has the power to intervene, to open doors, to change circumstances, and to bring you through situations that seem impossible. But you have to trust Him. You have to let go of the fear that says you have to do everything yourself, and step into the freedom that comes from knowing God is with you every step of the way. When we talk about doing our best, it's not just about striving harder or working more. It's about being faithful with what God has given you. Sometimes our best might not look like much in the eyes of the world. It might not bring immediate success or instant results. But when we are faithful in the small things, God sees our hearts and multiplies our efforts in ways that go beyond what we can understand. In the parable of the talents, Jesus reminds us that God rewards faithfulness, not necessarily success. If we do our best and offer it to Him, He is faithful to take what we give and make it more than we could have ever imagined. You see, the struggle many of us face is that we think that doing our best means achieving perfection. But God never asks for perfection, He asks for our best. And our best comes from a heart that is surrendered to Him. We may fall short of our goals, but when our efforts are offered with faith, they become part of God's plan. The story of the widow's mite shows us that it's not about how much we give, but how much of our heart is in it. When we give our best, no matter how small or insignificant it seems, God can multiply it and use it for His glory. One of the most powerful examples of this is the story of David. When God called David to be king, he didn't have the outward qualifications that the world would have looked for. He was just a shepherd boy, forgotten by his family, overlooked by society. But David gave his best in the field, protecting his sheep with all his heart. He learned to trust God in the quiet moments when no one was watching, and when the time came for him to face Goliath, he didn't hesitate. He didn't try to do it in his own strength. Instead, he said the battle is the Lord's, and he placed his trust in God's power. He did his part, he slung the stone, but it was God who brought down the giant. David knew that his best was enough, because God would do the rest. In the same way, God is asking us to give our best in everything we do, whether it's in our jobs, our relationships, our ministry, or our daily lives. But once we've done our part, we must release the rest into His hands. We can't control the outcomes, but we can trust that God will work everything together for our good. The Apostle Paul reminds us in Philippians 4:6-7 that we should not be anxious about anything, but in everything, with prayer and supplication, we should present our requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. This peace comes when we stop trying to control everything and allow God to take over. When we do our best and let God do the rest, we enter into a divine partnership that brings peace, confidence, and hope. It's not about doing more, striving harder, or being perfect. It's about doing what we can and trusting God to take care of the rest. This is where true freedom is found. The story of the Apostle Peter walking on water provides another profound lesson in doing our best and trusting God. When Jesus called Peter to come out onto the water, Peter did his best. He stepped out of the boat in faith, with his eyes fixed on Jesus. But when he began to look at the waves and the wind, he started to sink. Jesus didn't condemn Peter for his failure. Instead, he reached out and caught him, saying, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" The lesson here is clear. When we take our eyes off God and focus on our own abilities or the circumstances around us, we begin to sink. But when we do our best and keep our eyes on Him, He will catch us, He will sustain us, and He will do the rest. Our faith is strengthened when we do our best, but it's perfected when we let God do the rest. This partnership requires trust, and trust is built over time. As you continue to do your best in every area of your life, remember that God is always at work behind the scenes, orchestrating things you can't even see yet. He knows what you need before you even ask, and He will make a way where there seems to be no way. Just as God provided for the Israelites in the wilderness, He will provide for you. Just as He answered the prayers of His people throughout history, He will answer yours. When you do your best and let God do the rest, you can rest in the assurance that your efforts are never in vain. God sees you. He knows your struggles. He knows your heart. And He is faithful to fulfill His promises in your life. There is power in surrendering your plans, your dreams, and your efforts to God. It is then that you will experience His provision, His timing, and His blessings in ways you never could have imagined. As we dive deeper into this truth, we must realize that this is not a one-time decision. Doing your best and letting God do the rest is a daily choice, a lifestyle that we must adopt if we are to experience the fullness of God's provision and peace. This is why we must cultivate a heart of surrender, a heart that continuously trusts God in every situation, no matter how difficult it may seem. Every day we are faced with opportunities to either control everything or let go and trust that God will do the rest. The key lies in how we approach life's challenges. In the world, we are constantly told to be self-sufficient, to take control, and to trust in our abilities alone. There is a push to be independent, to prove ourselves worthy of success. But in God's kingdom, true strength is found in surrender. The more we try to hold on to control, the more we carry unnecessary weight that God never intended for us to bear. The more we insist on doing it all ourselves, the less we make room for God to move in our lives. This is why the call to surrender is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength, a sign of trusting in the one who is far greater than us. It is human nature to want to take matters into our own hands when things aren't going as planned. We want to control the outcome. We want to make sure everything works out exactly how we envision it. But the Bible teaches us that our thoughts and ways are not God's ways, and His plan for us is far greater than anything we could have imagined. Isaiah 55:8-9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. We are limited by our understanding, but God is not." When we let go of the need to control every situation, we give God the opportunity to do something far beyond what we could ever achieve on our own. Think about the times in your life when you were at your lowest, when you felt like there was no way out, and yet somehow God made a way. It wasn't because of your efforts or because you somehow figured everything out. It was because you did your part and trusted God to do the rest. This is where faith becomes tangible. This is where we begin to understand that our best is never wasted when it is entrusted to God. No effort, no act of faith, no prayer is ever in vain. God sees it all, and He works behind the scenes in ways that we cannot always comprehend. Take the story of Joseph in the Bible, for instance. Joseph did his best to remain faithful to God, even in the midst of betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. He did everything right, and yet his circumstances seemed to be going in the opposite direction. But Joseph didn't let his difficult circumstances dictate his faith. He didn't give up on his dreams or on God's promises. Even when he was in prison, he continued to do his best, and ultimately God elevated to a place of great influence. Joseph's story is a powerful reminder that our efforts are never in vain, and that even when things don't make sense, God is working all things together for our good. Joseph's life teaches us that sometimes our best may not immediately lead to success or recognition, but it is always part of God's greater plan. We may not see the immediate results of our hard work, but God sees it, and in His perfect timing, He will make a way for us. This is where trust comes in. Trusting that God is always at work, even when we can't see the outcome. Trusting that He will take our best efforts and make them greater than we could have ever imagined. The challenge is not in doing our best, but in trusting God with the results. Another important aspect of this truth is the understanding that God's timing is perfect. We may think we know when something should happen or how it should happen, but God's timing is always better than our own. His ways are higher than our ways, and His timing is always perfect. Ecclesiastes 3:1 says, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens." We must learn to trust that God's timing is flawless. It's not always easy, and there may be times when we feel impatient or frustrated. But we must hold on to the truth that God knows exactly when to bring things into fruition. The key to peace in this process is understanding that we are not in control of everything. We cannot force God to act according to our timeline or our desires. However, when we release control and trust Him with the rest, we experience a peace that surpasses understanding. This is not a peace that comes from knowing everything will work out exactly how we want, but rather a peace that comes from knowing that God is in control, and He is good. This peace is a result of fully surrendering to His will and trusting that He knows what is best for us. Many of us struggle with anxiety because we feel the need to control every aspect of our lives. We worry about the future, about our jobs, our families, and our dreams. But Jesus tells us in Matthew 6:34, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." Each day has enough trouble of its own when we do our best and leave the rest to God. We are choosing to live in the present, trusting that He will provide for us in every moment. We don't need to carry the weight of tomorrow. God will take care of it. This is the freedom that comes from surrender. The journey of doing your best and letting God do the rest is not a one-time event, but a continuous process. It is about learning to trust God more each day, to rely on His strength, His timing, and His plan. We will face challenges, we will experience setbacks, and we will encounter difficulties. But if we hold on to the truth that God is always with us and He is always working on our behalf, we can face these challenges with confidence and peace. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul says, "But He said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.'" This is a powerful reminder that it's in our weakness that God's strength is made perfect. When we acknowledge that we cannot do it all on our own, and we surrender our efforts to God, His power is displayed in ways that we could never accomplish on our own. It's in our weakness that God's greatness shines through. This is why surrender is so important. It's in letting go that we allow God to take control and do what only He can do. There may be times when you feel like you are doing your best, but things are not progressing the way you had hoped. You may feel discouraged as if your efforts are not bearing fruit. But I want to encourage you today that even when you don't see immediate results, your best is never wasted. God is working behind the scenes, and in His perfect timing, He will bring the harvest. Galatians 6:9 reminds us, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Keep doing your best, keep trusting God, and keep believing that He will do the rest. Doing your best and letting God do the rest is not about passivity. It is about actively participating in God's plan while trusting Him with the outcome. It's about doing everything you can with the resources and abilities God has given you, and then leaving the results in His hands. It's about letting go of the pressure to control every detail and allowing God to take the lead. When we embrace this truth, we experience a deep sense of peace and freedom. We no longer carry the heavy burden of trying to control every outcome. We trust that God will bring about what is best for us in His time, and we rest in His promises. This is the kind of life that God desires for us, a life of faith, trust, and peace, knowing that we are not alone in our efforts. As we continue to walk in faith, let us remember that doing our best is not about striving for perfection, but about being faithful with what God has given us. And when we do our best, we can trust that God will do the rest. His plans are greater than ours, and His power is more than enough to bring about the transformation we need. Let go of the worry, let go of the control, and allow God to take your efforts and multiply them in ways that you could never imagine. Trust Him with your dreams, your desires, and your future, and watch as He makes a way where there seems to be no way. As we continue on this journey, it's crucial to understand that faith is not simply a feeling or a belief, but an active stance we take in our lives. Faith is something we choose to walk in every day, especially when it feels like the world is pushing us to hold on tighter to what we have, to control every detail, and to find our own way out of the challenges we face. But when we choose faith, when we choose to trust God, it is not because we understand everything, or because we see the end from the beginning. It is because we believe in the one who knows all things and holds all things in His hands. Our role is to do our best and then let God do the rest. The story of Abraham in the Bible is one of the most powerful demonstrations of this principle. Abraham was called by God to leave his homeland and go to a place he did not know. God promised to make him the father of many nations, but the path to that promise was not easy. Abraham faced uncertainty, challenges, and moments where his faith was tested. Yet, he chose to do his best in following God's instructions, and he trusted God with the outcome. Abraham had no idea how God would fulfill the promise, but he walked in faith, trusting that God would do the rest. When he did his part, God responded with faithfulness, and He made Abraham the father of many nations, as promised. This is the power of doing your best and allowing God to take care of the rest. Abraham's story encourages us to trust God even when we don't have all the answers. It reminds us that faith is not about understanding every step or knowing every outcome. It is about believing that God is good, that He is faithful, and that He is more than able to do what He has promised. When we do our best, when we give our all, we are not relying on our strength, but on His. This is where the power of God is revealed in our lives. When we do our best, He takes what we offer and multiplies it in ways we could never imagine. Sometimes, though, the process of surrendering control can feel uncomfortable. We like to feel secure, to know that we are in charge of our own destiny, and to have a plan for every outcome. But when we surrender, when we release our grip and trust God to do the rest, we open ourselves to the possibility of seeing God move in our lives in ways that go beyond our understanding. This requires an attitude of humility, an openness to God's plan, and a willingness to let go of the need to know how everything will turn out. In the book of Proverbs, we are reminded of the importance of trusting God with all our heart. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." When we trust God with all our heart, We are acknowledging that His wisdom is greater than our own. We are choosing to surrender our need for control and to trust that He will guide us in the right direction. We may not always understand how He is leading us, but we can trust that His path is the best one. There is great freedom in this trust. It allows us to release the burden of trying to make everything work out on our own. It allows us to walk through life with the assurance that we are not alone in our efforts. When we let go of control and trust God with the rest, we invite His supernatural power to work in our lives. This is where miracles happen. This is where God can take our small, imperfect efforts and turn them into something extraordinary. The key is not in trying to figure everything out ourselves, but in allowing God to step in and do what only He can do. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul tells us, "But He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." This is the heart of surrender. When we acknowledge our weaknesses, when we accept that we cannot do it all on our own, we make room for God's strength to fill us. It is in our surrender that His power is made perfect. This is the paradox of the Christian life in letting go. We receive more than we could ever achieve by holding on. This is where we begin to see the transformative power of faith. When we surrender, when we trust, we become vessels for God's power. Our efforts, no matter how small, are magnified by His grace. This is why doing your best and letting God do the rest is not just a principle for success, it is a way of life. It is a way of living in harmony with God's plan for our lives, allowing Him to take what we offer and multiply it in ways that far exceed our expectations. But even as we do our best and trust God with the rest, we must also remember that our journey with God is not always going to be easy. There will be moments when we question why things are happening the way they are. We may face challenges that seem insurmountable, and we may wonder if our efforts are enough. But it is in those moments of uncertainty that we are called to press in and continue trusting God. It is in those moments that our faith is tested and refined. It is in those moments that we learn to truly rely on God and not on our own understanding. When we face difficulties, it is easy to think that God has forgotten us or that He is not working on our behalf. But that is when we must remember the truth: God is always working. Even when we cannot see the evidence, God is at work behind the scenes. He is orchestrating everything for our good, and He will never leave us or forsake us. Hebrews 13:5 reminds us, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." When we trust God, when we do our best and let Him do the rest, we can rest in the assurance that He is with us, guiding us, and working on our behalf. In Philippians 1:6, Paul writes, "Being confident of this, that He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. God is not only with us in the beginning, He is with us throughout the entire process. He will continue the work He has started in us, and He will bring it to completion. Our job is to do our best and trust Him to do the rest. When we keep our eyes on Him, when we remain faithful, He will bring about the results in His time. The process of doing our best and letting God do the rest is not about perfection, but about faithfulness. It's about showing up every day, doing what we can with what we have, and trusting that God will take care of the rest. This is the heart of Christian living in dependence on God, knowing that He is the one who will make all things work together for our good. It is a life of surrender, trust, and faith, and when we embrace this lifestyle, we will see God move in ways that we could never have imagined. In this journey, there will be moments of doubt. There will be moments when it seems like our efforts are in vain. There will be times when we question whether God is really at work. But in those moments, we must choose to stand firm in our faith. We must remember the promises of God, and we must continue doing our best, knowing that God is faithful to complete what He has started in us. And when we do our part, we can rest in the assurance that He will do the rest. The beauty of this principle is that it frees us from the burden of striving for perfection. We no longer have to worry about getting everything right or making everything perfect. Our responsibility is simply to do our best and trust God with the rest. And when we do that, we can live in peace, knowing that God is working all things together for our good. He is faithful to his promises, and he will see us through every challenge, every trial, and every season of our lives. So today I encourage you to let go of the need to control everything. Do your best and let God do the rest. Trust him with your efforts, your dreams, and your future. When you do, you will experience a peace that surpasses understanding, a peace that comes from knowing that God is in control and that he is working on your behalf. Your best is never in vain when it is entrusted to him. As you continue to trust God with your best and let him do the rest, it's essential to recognize that God's ways are not our ways. We often feel that our timing should be the timing that is honored, but God's timing is always perfect. He doesn't work according to our plans, but according to his own divine purpose for us. This is why it's so important to understand that when we do our part, our best, it's not about rushing to see the results. It's about patiently waiting on God's perfect timing. Isaiah 55:8-9 tells us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This truth may be challenging for many of us to accept, because we want to know when things will happen, how they will happen, and why certain things are happening. But the beauty of doing our best and letting God do the rest is that we are stepping into a space of faith that says, I don't need to know it all, I just need to trust that God knows what he's doing. In our day-to-day lives, we often feel the pressure to control the outcomes. We think that if we can just perfect every situation, we can make things happen in our favor. But that is not how God works. He wants us to be active participants, but he also wants us to recognize that he is sovereign. When we do our best, we acknowledge that our efforts are not in vain, but our efforts alone are not what determine the results. We must allow God to shape and direct those results, even when we don't see how they will unfold. We trust him because his ways are higher than ours. There are times when our best may not seem like enough. The results may not immediately reflect the amount of effort we've put in. We may feel frustrated and discouraged because we don't see the immediate rewards of our labor. But let me assure you that in those moments, God is still at work. He sees everything, even when we cannot see the fruit of our efforts. The Bible is filled with examples of people who trusted in God's timing and received the rewards of their patience and faithfulness. Consider Joseph's story. Joseph, the son of Jacob, had a dream in which he saw his brothers bowing down to him. This dream was a prophecy, a glimpse into God's plan for his life. But Joseph's journey to that promise was not easy. He was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused of a crime, and imprisoned for many years. Joseph could have given up on his dreams, could have become bitter and disillusioned. But Joseph chose to do his best, regardless of the circumstances. He did his best as a servant in Potiphar's house. He did his best in prison. And in doing his best, Joseph never lost sight of the fact that God was still at work, even when his situation seemed hopeless. Finally, in God's perfect timing, Joseph was elevated to a position of power in Egypt, and his brothers did come to him for help, just as he had seen in his dream years before. But Joseph never could have imagined that his faithful service in prison would lead him to a place where he would save not only his family but an entire nation from famine. God did the rest. Joseph did his part, and God brought it all together at the perfect moment. This same principle applies to our lives today. When we are in the midst of trials, when it feels like we are doing everything we can but seeing little to no results, we must remember that God is faithful. We may not understand how he is working, but he is working nonetheless. Our job is to remain faithful, to do our best, and to trust that God will work everything out for our good in his perfect time. The reality is that our faith is often refined in the waiting. It is during the seasons where we cannot control the outcome that our trust in God grows. Faith is not built on seeing the end result immediately, but on knowing that God is with us every step of the way. He never leaves us or forsakes us, even when we are walking through difficult seasons. The Bible assures us that he is working all things together for our good, Romans 8:28. His work may be hidden from our view, but he is doing something greater than we can understand. When we are faced with uncertainty, it's easy to want to rush the process. We can become impatient and start to take matters into our own hands. But God's word reminds us that patience is not only important but necessary. James 5:7-8 tells us, "Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near." This passage illustrates the necessity of waiting. Like the farmer who sows the seeds and then waits for the harvest, we must also wait on God's timing. Waiting on God is not passive, it is active trust. It is continuing to do our best while trusting that God will bring about the results at the right time. In this process, we build perseverance and character. The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 5:3-4, "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character. Hope, our best effort, is often tested through the waiting period." When we continue to do our best, even when we don't see the results, we build spiritual muscles that prepare us for the blessings God has in store for us. But even as we wait, we must never forget that God's purpose is bigger than our own plans. His plans for us are full of hope, peace, and good things, but they require patience, faith, and trust. When we do our best, God works with us, and He transforms the process into something that shapes us for eternity. He is not just concerned with the outcome, but with the work He is doing in us as we wait. Trusting God in the waiting process refines our character, strengthens our faith, and prepares us to receive the promises He has for us. The journey of faith, of doing our best and trusting God to do the rest, is not about seeing immediate results. It is about living in trust that God is working in ways we cannot see. It is about being faithful with what He has given us, knowing that He will take care of the outcome. And just as a farmer waits for the harvest, we too must wait with anticipation for the blessings that will come in God's perfect timing. Sometimes, though, we may become discouraged, wondering if our best is truly enough. But the reality is that God doesn't measure our success by the world's standards. He measures our success by our faithfulness and our trust in Him. Jesus tells us in Matthew 17:20, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." What seems small and insignificant to us can be mightily used by God when we trust Him with the outcome. When we do our best, He is able to take our small efforts and multiply them in ways that exceed our expectations. God does not call us to achieve perfection, He calls us to be faithful. He calls us to give our best and then trust Him with the rest. When we do this, we create space for God to move in our lives in ways that go beyond our understanding. The key to success in God's kingdom is not striving to be the best in the world's eyes, but surrendering our plans, our timing, and our efforts to Him. In everything you do, remember this: your best is enough when it is in God's hands. It may not always look like what you expect, but when you trust God with your efforts, He will always fulfill His promises. He will always make a way where there seems to be no way. So continue to do your best, keep trusting God, and let Him do the rest. He is faithful, and He will complete the work He has begun in you. As you continue to walk in faith, doing your best and letting God do the rest, you must remember that there are moments when the weight of the world feels heavy, and the burden of your effort seems overwhelming. In these moments, you might question whether the sacrifices and hard work will ever lead to the desired outcome. It is in these seasons of uncertainty and struggle that God's faithfulness is most evident. The Bible assures us that He is close to the brokenhearted, that He is present in our pain, and that He will never leave us. When you find yourself at the edge of your strength, remember that your best is not about your strength alone, but about your willingness to surrender your efforts to God. God doesn't need you to be strong in the way the world defines strength. He needs you to be humble, to trust in His sovereignty, and to be willing to give Him what you have, no matter how limited it may seem. God has always used ordinary people with limited resources to do extraordinary things. Look at the story of the widow's two mites in Mark 12:41-44. Jesus observed the poor widow who gave 2 small coins And he told his disciples that her offering was greater than that of the rich who gave out of their abundance. Why? Because the widow gave her best, even though it seemed small in comparison to others. It was a heart of trust and surrender that mattered most. When we give our best to God, even when it seems like a little, He multiplies it. He takes our small efforts and, with His divine power, turns them into something significant. The little that you offer in faith, when placed in God's hands, can become the key to unlock doors you never imagined. Remember that the widow did not need to see the full reward of her sacrifice immediately. She trusted that God would honor her act of faith, and Jesus recognized her heart. Your efforts, no matter how small or insignificant they may seem to the world, are seen by God and are honored by Him. He sees the intent of your heart, not just the outward results. Doing your best is not always about what others see. It is about being faithful to God, regardless of the praise or acknowledgement you may receive from others. In Matthew 6:14, Jesus teaches us that our acts of righteousness should not be done for show, but should be between us and God. It's not about the recognition we get from people, it's about pleasing God with our hearts and actions. When we act in faith, giving our best, God sees us. He is the one who rewards, not the world. You may not receive the accolades or the recognition you feel you deserve right away, but God will reward you in due time. There will be times when it feels like others are succeeding, and you wonder why your best hasn't led to similar results. In those moments, it is crucial to remember that God's plans for you are uniquely designed for your life. What may seem like a delay in your life is actually God preparing you for something bigger and better than you could have ever imagined. He knows the future, and He knows exactly what you need to shape you for the calling He has placed on your life. God's timing is never wrong, and His plans are always perfect. Even when you do your best and don't see the immediate fruit of your labor, trust that He is working behind the scenes. Just as a farmer patiently waits for the harvest, we too must wait for the season when God's blessings will come to fruition in our lives. In the waiting, we are being refined, our character is being built, and our faith is being strengthened. James 1:4 encourages us, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. When we face challenges, it is easy to want to give up, but it is in these moments that God is doing the deepest work in us. He is teaching us to rely on Him, to trust His timing, and to grow in patience. Every struggle, every setback, every moment of waiting is not wasted in the hands of God. He is using it to shape us into the people He created us to be. This process is not easy, but it is necessary for our spiritual growth and maturity. Doing our best in the midst of trials builds endurance, and that endurance becomes the foundation for the blessings that are to come. Another aspect of doing your best and letting God do the rest is understanding that God's definition of success may be different from our own. The world measures success by wealth, status, and external accomplishments. But God measures success by faithfulness, obedience, and the condition of our hearts. Jesus told His disciples in Matthew 25:21, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." God's reward for our best efforts is not always immediate or visible, but it is eternal. When we are faithful in the small things, God entrusts us with greater things. It's essential to remember that God's purpose for our lives is not just about achieving worldly success. His purpose is about fulfilling His will and bringing glory to His name. Your best may look different from the best of someone else, and that's okay. What matters is that you are being faithful to what God has called you to do. The Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 9:24-27, comparing the Christian life to a race. He says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize." Paul reminds us that the race is not about comparing ourselves to others, but about running faithfully with the goal of honoring God in everything we do. When you give your best, you are honoring God. You are showing Him that you trust Him with your life and that you believe He is working in you and through you. It's not about the outcome or the accolades, it's about the heart behind your efforts. If your heart is to glorify God and to serve Him with all that you are, then your best is enough. God is not looking for perfection, He is looking for faithfulness, obedience, and a willing heart. In moments of discouragement or when you feel like you are not seeing the results of your best efforts, remember that God is faithful to finish the work He has started in you. Philippians 1:6 encourages us being confident of this, that He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. Trust that God will complete what He has started in your life. Your best, no matter how imperfect, is part of His perfect plan. He will use it, refine it, and multiply it for His glory. As you continue to walk in faith, do your best and trust God to do the rest. Keep your eyes on Him, keep pressing forward, and know that your labor is not in vain. Even when you don't see immediate results, God is working in ways you cannot see. He is doing the impossible with your efforts, and in His perfect timing, He will bring it all to pass. Keep believing, keep trusting, and keep doing your best. God is faithful, and He will do the rest. In conclusion, I want to remind you that as you give your best and trust God to do the rest, He will guide, strengthen, and bless you beyond your imagination. Your efforts, no matter how small they seem, are never in vain when placed in the hands of an almighty God. You are not alone in this journey. God walks with you every step of the way. His timing is perfect, His plans are greater than you can comprehend, and His faithfulness will never fail. I pray that you continue to walk in faith, doing your best in everything you do, and fully trusting that God is at work, orchestrating the perfect plan for your life. May you feel His presence, peace, and power in every step you take. And may He bless you with the strength to persevere through every challenge. May the fruits of your labor be multiplied in His perfect timing. And may His grace cover you in every season of your life. Thank you for joining me today and for allowing me to share this message with you. May God bless you abundantly, and may His peace and favor surround you always. Keep trusting, keep believing, and remember, when you do your best and let God do the rest, there is no limit to what He can do in and through your life.